Bow your heads, please.
Dear God, thank you for today. Thank you that we get to come here and learn about all this stuff with the aspect of you in it. Please bless us today, that our minds are open to learning and that it all comes very easily. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Wow, easily. Never thought to pray that. We do have some fun labs in this chapter. So let's have some fun with the labs. I don't know about you. I thought this was a little confusing. How many of you found it a little confusing? Okay. Some of you got it. That's great. And I just found it a little confusing. And I've been teaching out of this book for about, 15 years. So I thought this time I'd make some notes and maybe it would help. We'll see. I can only hope, right? But it is a fun chapter because we get to play with mold. Aren't you excited? Okay. And so with that in mind, make sure that if you're allergic to mold, that you're, using gloves when you grab these things. And if you really know you have a mold problem next week, I would suggest you go to the hardware store and get some of those masks that you can put, that they use for painting. So you can put a mask on so that you don't have a problem, because I don't want anybody to have a problem. But they're really interesting to look at. I think you guys are going to have fun looking at them. Looks like you're looking at little forests, but you know what it's reminiscent of is a Dr. Seuss movie. When you look at the molds under the microscope, it's very reminiscent of a Dr. Seuss movie because they'll look like little forests of molds. And so they're really quite cool to look at if you can, if you can get a good sample under the microscope, which we will attempt to do. I need you guys to bring bread mold. I was saying that before class. I've already got some fruit mold and some liquid mold, but I don't have a lot of bread. You guys know that because I'm I'm wheat sensitive, so I tend not to have it around because I like it. So if you guys would set up some bread mold and bring that in, that would be very helpful so that we can get a couple good bread molds, okay? So if you have bread around, remember, this is the week you tell your mom, don't throw anything bad in the refrigerator away. I know it's weird. But if you don't tell her, she's going to clean out the fridge and just chuck things. And she might be chucking out the best mold samples. So tell her so that she's aware, okay? And maybe she'll set them aside for you. You should see the green provolone I got going for you guys. And it is green, heavily green. My husband goes, "What are you trying to make blue cheese?" I go, "Oh no, we'll see what it's going to turn into." Anyway, all right, so we're in Kingdom Fungi. And that starts on page 97. And we've already done Monera, which was our bacteria, and we've done Protista, which was our algae and our protozoa. And now we're doing fungi. Remember, fungi, are they eukaryotic or prokaryotic? Eukaryotic, very good. In general, are they single cellular or multicellular? Multicellular in general. And are they heterotrophic or autotrophic? Heterotrophic. They're heterotrophic, that's right. And that's why they're not in Kingdom Plantae, because everything that are plants are actually autotrophic. These guys are heterotrophic. As heterotrophs, are they more often than not consumers or decomposers or what? Decomposers. They're more often than not, they're decomposers, and it lists them as saprophytic, mostly saprophytes. We have a group of saprophytes, although most of them are saprophytes. We were told that some of them aren't saprophytic. What are they? Parasitic, very good. We do have some examples of parasitic fungi. Are fungi important to the environment?
Yes.
Yes, very, very important. And it made the statement in this book that one tree, an average elm tree, which I can't relate being from Florida, will drop 100 pounds of leaves on the ground. Really? Wow, there must be kids making a fortune raking leaves. I mean, serious stuff. So it said that, see, once again, in Florida, I can't relate to that, being a South Floridian. We have mostly evergreens. And let's be honest, most of us don't like trees that drop leaves because they make a mess in the yard. But apparently this is a normal thing, and the fungi actually break them down. Now, I'm going to give you a Florida example. You ready? Florida people. In Florida, in wild situations, as in forested situations, we have two basic types in Florida. We have the pine types, which if you've noticed in a natural situation, they tend to have grass and possibly palmettos in between, and then the pine trees, correct? the natural way of putting the nutrients back into the soil, so the natural cycle for that is fire. Those are fire-dependent ecosystems where fire comes through and it doesn't burn the whole tree down. It comes through and just burns off the litter. In other words, the pine needles and the things that have fallen on the ground. And then the fire, and then it rains, and the fire actually breaks the stuff back down into ash. It rains, turns it into fertilizer, and then it feeds the whole environment. And if you see one of those environments after a fire, you'll notice it's full of wildflowers and new growth, and the deer are in there, and the quail are in there, and everybody's happy. And then I know, bummer man, we come move in and stop the fires because we don't want them to burn our houses down, and then it gets overgrown, and then the deer have no place to live, and the quail disappear, but we won't go there right now. Anyway, and so that's one of the natural ways. Fire is one of the natural ways to get the nutrients back in the soil. Do you know what the other way is in Florida? When you get into a thicker forest, like upstate, where they actually have hardwood trees, fungi. Fungi are actually what does it, because you can't get a fire to blast through those forests because they're damp. They're damp. They stay damp because of it's darker inside. They've got the heavier foliage, and so the light can't come through as easily, and so it stays damper. And so what happens is the fungi are responsible to break down the nutrients, break down the dead things, put the nutrients back into the soil, and that helps the cycling. So in Florida, we basically have fire-dependent forests, and then we have fungi-dependent forests. Isn't that neat? So I just wanted to apply that to home for you, okay? So that applied the fungi here at home, because we just don't have 400 pounds of leaves from elm trees, but that's okay. Maybe you do, and that's all good. Good luck raking them all up. Okay, so let's go over to page 98, please. Now, we know that they're heterotrophs, mostly saprophytic, some parasitic. They're different on how they eat. Now remember, plants don't eat because they're autotrophs. They make their own food, right? Photosynthesis. But these guys are saprophytic. They eat dead guys. But they don't just go and eat, do they? So what's different about how these guys digest? And all, as far as I know, all multicellular fungus digest their food this way.
They do it outside of their cells.
Good. It's extracellular digestion, which actually means that instead where we eat something and digestion happens inside of us, these guys actually squirt the digestive juices on the food and then absorb the digested food directly in. That's what extracellular digestion means. I'm going to give you a critter that does that. You ready? Isn't that weird? There's a critter that does that. Starfish. Yeah, starfish will grab with their little suction feet. They'll grab a clam and they will open it and they will invert their stomach into the clam. They will put their digestive juices in it. They will digest the clam. They will absorb the juices. Then they will pull their stomach back into their little starfish body. Whoa. So that's something that fungi and starfish have in common. Extracellular digestion. Isn't that weird? And it's actually the extracellular digestive type fluids that are believed to cause some fungi to be a problem for us, like the poisons and stuff that we find are sometimes associated with that fluid. Okay, all fungi, let's do the generality. So let's do the generality. So far, we have everybody in kingdom fungi are heterotrophs, right? And we said that they're mostly saprophytes. Okay, but we do have a few parasites. We said that they participate in extracellular digestion. So this is something that they all participate in. What is the main body of a multicellular fungi called? This is where I got confused because the way it was presented in the book. What is the main, that's why I'm going to try to make this a little clearer for you. So you may want to write this down because it may help. What is the main body? Okay, so if you saw, good girl, say it.
The stalk.
Well, no, I thought you said something else. Okay.
Mycelium?
Very good. This is a puffball that was kindly brought in by Mr. Nelson. And this part is the fruiting body. This part is the fungi. See it? What looks like the root is not the root at all. That's actually the fungus. This is just the fruiting body. It's like the flower on a plant. It's not the plant. So the fungi, that is the fungi. This is the fruiting body where the spores are made, and then it'll disappear, and this fungi will continue. Everybody with me so far? So that is called the mycelium. They all multicellular fungus, mycelium, have a mycelium. And the mycelium is the main body of the fungi. It's the part that is actually embedded in the food. It's actually where the extracellular digestion happens. It's very, very important. Now, it is made up of a weird type of cell that looks like thread. And what are those types of cells called that look very thread-like? They look, say it?
Hypha.
Hypha, and that would be singular. So hyphy would be plural, and they're usually going to be plural. Thank you very much. So these are made up of hyphae, which are, the book calls it filamentous fungal cells. They look like little threads under the microscope. That's what they look like. Fungi in general are multicellular, although we do have some single cellular forms. That's what I want you to bring to me. Most teachers want apples. I want bread mold. Anyway, remember, the mycelium is actually the main portion of the fungus. These are fruiting bodies, so they're not the main portion. And we have to remember that. And the mycelium are very thread-like, made up of the hyphae, or hypha would be the singular. And this shows you what they look like under the microscope. And so you see how very thread-like they are, aren't they? Okay, now these guys can come in septate or non-septate hyphae. In other words, these threads can be separated into differing cells, or they can be just all without any walls in between them. That's weird, isn't it? And they told us in the book that even if they're separated like normal cells, where there's cell walls in between them, the septate hyphae, and I don't know about you, but I was kind of happy that they made it sound like they're separated. Septate, separated, non-septate, not separated. It sounds very normal, doesn't it? Even the ones with the walls in between, they have little holes so that the cytoplasm can move back and forth in between the different cells. It is the only kingdom in God's creation that we know of that does this. Everybody else, if there's cell walls, there's plasma membranes, it's a distinct cell in multicellular organisms. This is not the case here. They share the cytoplasm. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Anyway, I think it is. Okay, so the hyphae, septate and non-septate hyphae. The other thing is that most of them are multicellular, so I'm going to put here multicellular. And what's something else? I'm going to erase and put it at the top. But what's something else that you read about that all of these guys share? And if they don't, they put them someplace weird because they don't know why, they can't figure it out. How do they, yes?
Have some form of sexual reproduction.
Okay, to produce spores. There is some form of sexual reproduction of spores. Of spores. Okay, and in most cases, that's showing you one of those type of structures. Let me just make sure we've covered everything we needed to here. Tell me, what is the substance that is tough but flexible that is found in the cell walls of a fungus? Oh, never mind. Don't tell me. I don't want you to say it wrong. Because it's a weird word. This, when you were a kid, homeschoolers, when you were a kid, did your mom use the 72 phonogram cards and teach you all the different phonograms? So you get the A card out and you were supposed to say a, ah. Did you guys do those? I did those with my kids. There were 72 phonogram cards. You were supposed to do them. CH was our favorite card. And the reason it was our favorite card is it sounded like a train. Doesn't that sound like a train? Right? Okay. Well, this is the k sound, not the ch sound. Please do not say chitin. This is chitin. Everybody say chitin. Chitin, like flying a kite. Okay? Chitin. Thank you very much. You guys know how weird I am about the words. Anyway, so that's chitin. And chitin actually is the chemical that is in the cell walls that gives it its toughness, but its flexibility. I'm going to give you an example where I know you guys have all messed with chitin unless you don't eat shrimp. Has your mom ever had you help her clean shrimp? Do you know how the shell of the shrimp bends? It's tough, but it bends. Guess what that is? Chitin. Okay, I got you, even if you don't eat shrimp. You ever stepped on a roach? Ew. No. You know how it crunches? Chitin. Ha, I got you. Okay. All right, we'll get off of that. Go ahead and turn over to page 100, please. Okay. I'm going to put here for our last thing here that the cells share cytoplasm because that is really unique. And it's the only kingdom that does that. Now, with that in mind, over on page 100, we're going to go on and we're going to look at the different hyphae that a fungus can have. May I erase this? Okay. And actually, on the bottom of the previous page, it gave you rhizoid hyphae. And rhizoid hyphae is the mycelium, from what the book said. Okay? So the rhizoid hyphae is embedded in the material in which it grows. It's the part of the mycelium that supports and digests. All fungi have rhizoid hyphae because all multicellular fungi have mycelium, and this is the hyphae in the mycelium. Okay? On this page where we're at, on page 100, then we get to aerial hyphae. Now, these would be aerial hyphae. Why? Because they're not embedded in the food, correct? And so if we have aerial hyphae, it told us that there were 3 possible reasons, functions, for aerial hyphae. It said that one was to absorb oxygen. Okay. So that's a good reason to be sticking up out of the food, to breathe. It's a good reason, right? Second one, and I'm going to do them a little out of order from what they did. They went on and said the sporophore or the stolon. Let's do the stolon next. The stolon was actually a hyphae that's not embedded in the food, that what it does, let's say we have a little fungus right here, okay? A stolon, and here's the mycelium, and here's the food. That's the fruiting body. The stolon comes over here, and then it grows a new mycelium. So what's happening there? Asexual reproduction, isn't it? So the stolon has asexual reproduction going on because it just reaches over and it puts down another mycelium, which means it's making another fungus. And then it can put down another stolon and put down another mycelium and make another fungus. Does everybody follow with what I'm saying? So this is asexual reproduction. And this is actually this guy right here. Now the third possibility, that's a form of reproduction. This next one is too, but it's sexual reproduction. And that is a sporophore. I can do this really. Spore, let me get it right, hang on. Yep, it's a sporophore. Sporophore. And I'm going to bring the sporophore back up to the top, okay? Now, the sporophore there's 1 of 2 types of sporophores. There is the sporangiophore. I know. Didn't think that fungi could get this wild, did you? And there's the conditiophore. Conditiophore. This is like a spelling test. Okay. And so these are how, these are how they produce spores asexually, not sexually. These are how they produce spores. Produce spores asexually. So actually, stolon are asexual reproduction and sporophores are asexual reproduction. The stolon, though, just reaches over and grows a new mycelium, so it grows a new fungi, whereas the sporangiophores are actually producing spores. And then those spores will blow away to the next piece of bread or wherever and start growing and turn into a new fungus. Does that make sense? Now, the difference between, I don't know about you guys, but this one is one of the ones that I kept looking at going, well, what's the difference between a Sporangia and a Conditio? Well, it says that the spores are formed within enclosures. So the spores are in enclosures, and I'm immediately thinking, what's that? And so, let's see. This is a Sporangia. So apparently the spores are in an enclosure there, whereas this one is a Conditio. Can you see the little dots? You can see the spores. They're not closed in anything. They're just, can everybody see that here? Can you see the little spores? That's a Conditio. It's not inside anything. Whereas here, look, you don't see all the little dots, do you? That's because they're actually covered by a little enclosure around it. And then when something disturbs it, it'll release the spores. That's the only difference, okay? So no enclosures. Spores, no enclosures. So they're just out. And that's why I said, when you get a group of these and you're looking at them under the microscope, it kind of looks like you're in a Dr. Seuss story. So bread mold, if you were looking at it, and you will under the microscope next week, you'll see the stolon between the different mycelium. You'll see the sporangiophores up there, and that's what makes the little tree-looking things in the forest. And that's all under the microscope. And then when you break it or whatever, the spores come out, and then they go every place and they grow new ones, and you get new bread mold. Ooh, joy. So, okay, I just want to make sure we covered everything we're supposed to there. All right, the next thing that's covered, the next type of hyphy, so we've got rhizoid hyphy, which is the mycelium, and that's going to be the main portion. It's going to be in the food. It's going to take care of the extracellular digestion, etc. Then we have the aerial hyphy, which could either be breathing, or it can be a stolon, making a new fungus by putting down a new mycelium asexually, or it can make a sporangiophore or a Conditiophore, which is asexually making the spores, and then those spores can go out and make more fungi. If you're dealing with a parasitic fungus, then they have Hastoria. And the Hastorium is actually a hyphy that goes into the cell of the host and absorbs the nutrients directly out of the cell of the host. And I found you pictures, micrographs, showing you the Hastoria of these fungi that are actually have entered the cell. See the host cells? Here's the mycelium, and here you have the Hastoria actually entering the host cell and absorbing the nutrients out of it, which is a trip when you think about it. Anyway, and so that shows you the last type of hyphy. Okay, let's go over on page 101, 4.1 on your own. It says an organism eats food and then digests it. Does this organism belong to kingdom fungi?
No.
No, why or why not? Because it's digesting its food internally, right? So that wouldn't work. Okay. 4.2, a farmer tries to remove a patch of mushrooms from his field by pulling all the stalks and caps in the patch out of the ground. Why has the farmer really not gotten rid of the fungus? Where's the fungus really?
It's really the
In the ground.
In the ground. It's the mycelium that's actually in the decaying matter in the ground, yes.
How would you actually remove them then?
Good question. I don't know. Mushroom killer? I don't know. That's a really good question. And they're eukaryotic cells like we are, so it can be a problem removing them. It's like if you have a yeast infection, it's very hard to get rid of because it's not a bacteria. A bacteria you can give an antibiotic or something like that for. But when you have a yeast infection, you're dealing with a eukaryotic cell, any kind of fungal infection. You're dealing with another eukaryotic cell, and it's hard to get rid of them. And I'm going to tell you something right now because this has come up a couple times in the last couple weeks for me. I know a person that had a fungal ear infection and was on fungicides, and my parents' dog has a yeast infection in his ears. Whenever you're fighting a fungal infection, you get that person off of any kind of sugar because fungus lives on sugar. That's what it lives on. And so if you can remove the sugar from the diet, it will benefit the individual trying to kill the fungi because the fungi is living on the sugar products. And actually, if you do a hardcore, like a candida type diet, a anti-yeast diet, you won't even eat potatoes. You won't eat vinegars because they're fermented. I mean, it's really, if you do it, there's no bread, there's no, I had somebody say, what can you eat? Well, you can basically eat meat and produce that's not starchy, and the only fruit you can eat on the anti-yeast or antifungal diet is berries. All the other fruits have too much sugar. So if you, and I did it once because I was trying to figure out what my skin issues were, which you and I both know now are the wheat and the dairy, but I did the antifungal diet. It was hard because you couldn't even eat mustard or vinegar. So like on salad, I was putting lemon juice or whatever because, can't even eat vinegar. But I'll be honest with you, I felt better than I ever had. I did it for 3 weeks and it was really hard, but the cracks in my heels disappeared for the first time in my life without me sawing at them. My skin cleared up and I felt great. And I just didn't realize how, now I know I'm a yeast carrier because I found that out when I was in cancer research. And I used to work with cloning tissue culture, and my boss found out the hard way because I'd be working in a sterile environment and my cultures would get yeast in them, and he goes, you're a yeast shedder. He goes, you got to basically go scrub down before you work with the cultures. So I know I have that issue like all my life, apparently. So I was really surprised at how good I felt. So I'm not suggesting that you do that, although it can clear up some issues that some people have because you don't realize you're fighting fungal issues in your body because most doctors don't look for it. That's the trick. But if you ever are like have an ear fungus or athlete's foot or those kind of things, even if you're using topical medication, if you'll get off the sugars, it will really help. Believe it or not, I had to tell my parents that because they feed that dog ice cream on a regular basis. I'm like, Mom, I said, quit feeding him any sweets at least till you get the yeast infection under control. She goes, oh, Bill, did you hear that? And I'm thinking, yeah, they like poison this dog with sugar because he's their baby. You know what I'm saying? Dog eats, it's terrible. But, my parents are in their 80s. It's their last dog, I figure, so we just figure he's a sacrifice, The dog thinks it's great, but I know it's not good for him. Okay, let's see. 4.3. A fungus produces Hastoria, which is plural of Hastorium. Is it saprophytic or parasitic? Come on, guys. Parasitic, thank you. Okay, then it goes into reproduction in kingdom fungi. Remember, they have both asexual and sexual reproduction. If they're going through sexual reproduction, then it will produce a fruiting body if it's a multicellular fungi. And the fruiting body, like with our mushrooms, with mushrooms, the fruiting body on a mushroom is what we call the mushroom. But the actual mushroom would be the mycelium, which is the part down in the ground that's already been ripped off of these store-bought mushrooms. Okay? So that would actually be the mushroom, and this would actually just be the fruiting body of the mushroom. And so we learned that that's where the spores are formed in these fruiting bodies, and that's where the spores are released, and then usually the wind picks them up or water when they're flagellated spores, and they can move. Let's see. So go over to page 102, please. And at the top of the page, it says, what job does the fruiting body of a fungus perform? Reproduction. It's where the spores are held and released. And then 4.5, spores of a fungus give rise to offspring that are identical in every way to the parent. Are they asexually or sexually formed? Asexually, because they're exactly the same as the parent. Thank you. And when we are talking about sexual reproduction at this point, after we study chapter 6, you'll really understand, actually it'll probably be chapter 7, because we'll learn about mitosis and meiosis and all that, and don't worry about it right now. But what you need to remember is that with sexual reproduction, there are 2 organisms involved, and therefore, as you learned in chapter 1, or module 1, that means there can be slight variations from the parent to the offspring because of the influx of the other DNA. And we're going to look at that, because what fuses on these guys is the hyphy. You have a hyphy coming from one mushroom and a hyphy coming from the other mushroom, and these thread-like cells will actually fuse And then out of that fusion will grow the mushroom, which is the fruiting body. And that's why that's considered sexual reproduction of the spores, because then the fruiting body will be in the spores. So you had a fusion of those two hyphae. I don't know about you, but that to me was confusing. I'm going, okay. Because that's so foreign to how everything I know works that it was just a little confusing for me. Look at the top of page 103, please. This gives you the phyla in kingdom fungi, and these are what you are supposed to know for this coming test. Basidia mycota, it tells us that they form their spores on club-like basidia. We're going to look at those today. Ascomycota sexually form their spores in sac-like asci. Isn't it convenient that the asci are with Ascomycetes and the basidia are with Basidia mycota, and Ascomycota. So it goes right along with it. In zygomycota, it forms sexual spores from a fusion of hyphae. Well, what you probably don't know, and you haven't learned yet, is what a zygote is. And a zygote is just a fertilized egg. We were all zygotes once. Okay, as soon as the egg becomes fertilized, it's no longer an egg, it's a zygote. That's all it is. So zygomycota actually has the hyphae fuse and produce the spores. Then we have Conditio mycota. Aren't these fun words? We should name some jazz band after these or something. I don't know. And they form flagellated spores, so they're going to be in a wet environment, aren't they? If they have flagellated spores, you're going to want to see them in where they can actually swim. Deuteromycota has no known method of sexual reproduction, and so they're the ones that they put in that because they don't know where else to put them. So if they can't figure out how they make spores sexually, they stick them in Deuteromycota. And then Myxomycota look like protozoa for part of their life, and then they look like a fungus while they reproduce. So that's how they put them there. So, and they're called slime molds. And I'm just going to tell you right up front, because the book never tells you, and it really bothered me that they never told us what protozoa it looks like. They look like amoeba in the feeding stage. They look like amoeba in the feeding stage, and then they look like a fungus when they reproduce their spores. So that's why we're putting them here, even though some people might put them with protozoa. Okay, we're not going to do the biological key because you guys already did that, and it was basically very redundant in my mind. But you do know, you have to know this table for your test. You have to be able to, separate how these guys are classified. Okay, by their sexual reproduction of spores. So let's do phylum Basidia mycota. Let's start there. These guys are known as club fungi. And it shows you a picture there that it's mushrooms, puffballs, and shell fungus. And by the grace of God, we have all three here today. Somebody actually brought puffballs. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. And my mom had this on her back porch. And I go, oh, Mom, I have to borrow that. Now, is that a shell fungus or what?